You're kidding, I said, staring at the CEO's daughter like she'd just declared bankruptcy at a board meeting. Nope, she chirped, flashing that influencer grin that could sell essential oils or ruin a company, depending on the lighting. My husband's cousin is taking your office. Pack up by Friday. That was the moment I knew the firm wasn't just circling the drain. It was about to flush itself loudly and blame the pipes. I'd spent 12 years keeping this circus of zoning permits, EPA filings, and caffeine-driven legal footnotes from collapsing into litigation. Now here came Madison Wells, fresh balayage, fresh delusion, armed with a TED Talk vocabulary, kicking me out like I was expired milk. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just said one word, the one that always scares executives the most. Perfect. I stood up, took my planner, my certification plaque from the Department of Environmental Compliance, and the same little pothos plant that had somehow survived 4 layoffs and 1 fire drill flood. I left the whiteboard untouched. Let them try to decipher 12 years of color-coded logic written by someone who actually knew what compliance meant. The HR rep by the door blinked at me like a deer caught between 2 contradictory policies. I walked past her, out the glass doors, down to the street, and into the small office space I'd quietly leased the month before. Madison thought she'd exiled me. She'd actually handed me the detonator. It had started like every Monday designed by Satan himself. Email pings before sunrise. Urgent calendar invites from people who spelled policy with 2 S's, and a subject line that already reeked of chaos. Leadership Transition Touchpoint. The sender, Madison Ann Wells, freshly returned from her creative sabbatical in Sedona, where she'd allegedly rediscovered herself and a deep love for crystal-aligned leadership. When I walked into the conference room, the one we called the Glass Bowl of Doom, she didn't even sit down. Just stood there in a designer blazer that probably cost more than my car. Hands clasped like she was opening a sermon. So, big picture, she began, voice dripping with PowerPoint energy. The board and I think it's time to make compliance more approachable, more future-forward. We're rebranding the department. I waited, arms folded. That's why, she said brightly. My husband's cousin Bryce will be stepping into your role. He's intuitive. He's worked with startups. He's super passionate about using AI to optimize zoning workflows. Bryce, the same guy who once asked me whether the Clean Water Act still applied and called OSHA a mood killer. The same man who thought permits were boomer paperwork and bragged that he could automate half the red tape with a chatbot. I smiled, the kind of smile you wear when the chessboard's already rigged 3 moves ahead. Perfect, I said again, and meant it, because 10 days before that meeting, I'd already removed myself, quietly, legally, permanently, from the state registry as the company's designated compliance officer. Form signed, notarized, time-stamped, submitted. Filed under State Code Title IX, Section 44B. The next time the city's quarterly audit ran, the system would look for my name, not find it, and trigger a compliance gap flag that would freeze every active permit the company held. They wouldn't notice right away. They never do. But when they finally did, it would be too late for tearful apologies or frantic phone calls. 2 months before Madison's big reveal, I'd been in that same office, 10:37 p.m., single desk lamp, stale coffee, scrolling through an email chain that could have ended careers. Subject: Emissions Audit Q2. The vendor report was incomplete, the raw data lost, and the fleet's diesel usage mysteriously unverified. Our clean air certification renewal was due within weeks. I'd asked procurement 6 times for the data. No answer. Then came the reply from Tommy, our vape pen-addicted logistics analyst. I think we're fudging it a little, but not in a bad way. No one sane writes that to a compliance officer. I forwarded it straight up the chain. Madison was still off finding her inner light, so her assistant responded. Maddie says this feels too intense for her current bandwidth. Can interns help? That was the moment I realized the company was unsalvageable. They'd ignored every warning, every audit note, every flagged permit. So I stopped shouting into the void. I started documenting everything. Every memo, every email, every whisper from employees too afraid to go on record. If they wanted to gamble with federal law, fine. I'd just make sure I wasn't sitting at the table when the dice exploded. I started going into the office on Saturdays, not for overtime, not to catch up, but to plan. The building was dead quiet then, just the hum of the HVAC and the flicker of an exit sign that never got fixed. I'd sit there with a thermos of coffee, my folder labeled continuity records, and start building what I knew would one day be called evidence. 2 sets of files, one for them, polished and incomplete, and one for me, airtight. Every missed inspection, every unsigned form, every zoning variance they pretended to submit but never did. Each page stamped, dated, cataloged. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. Because people like Madison don't realize the quiet ones are the ones keeping the whole circus from catching fire. They think silence equals submission. It's actually strategy. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the dark window. I looked exhausted. 12 years of late nights, deadline extensions, and quick fixes that were really last-minute compliance miracles. I was the firewall between them and disaster, and they mistook me for wallpaper. One night, I asked myself the question that changed everything. If they won't listen, do they deserve to survive it? The answer came easy. No. The next morning, I called my attorney, a patient man who'd been on retainer since the last time a client tried to pin a permit scandal on me. I told him I wanted to withdraw my designation as compliance officer, quietly and by the book. He chuckled once, low and approving, and said, "Then we'll do it clean." He sent over the forms that afternoon. 1 document, 4 signatures, a notary stamp, and a portal submission to the State Licensing Bureau. The title was simple: Designation Withdrawal, effective immediately. When I hit send, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relief. I blind copied my personal lawyer, saved the time-stamped confirmation, and leaned back in my chair like someone watching the first domino tip. 3 days later, silence. No reply from legal. No message from HR. Not even a Slack emoji. They hadn't opened it. I knew that because I'd attached a metadata tracker, a little digital breadcrumb that pings when a document is accessed. The only entity that opened it was the Bureau's server at 4:03 p.m. The company never did. So I smiled. Not the villain grin you see in bad movies, but the calm, satisfied one that comes right before impact. The kind of smile you get when you've done everything exactly right. That next morning, I came in early. The hallways were empty, still smelling like yesterday's panic and cheap lavender air freshener. I printed my resignation on thick bond paper, the kind you use for contracts, not emails, and sealed it in a crimson folder. Then I walked straight to the founder's office and slipped it into his old-school walnut inbox, the one he still swore made business personal. If he ever bothered to look inside, he'd find a neatly signed and notarized letter removing me as the one person authorized to keep his empire legal. I passed Bryce in the hallway. He was standing in front of a window, fixing his tie in the reflection like a man practicing to be competent. He gave me that grin, half smirk, half self-promotion. "Big things coming," he said, like we were partners in some visionary crusade. I nodded. "Oh, I know." By lunch, I'd cleared out half my desk. By 3 p.m., I'd finalized my HR exit consultation and transferred my remaining vacation payout to my health account. Nobody noticed. Madison was too busy curating a color palette for her department's rebrand. Bryce was sketching out a digital transformation plan for compliance, which sounded like something he'd read on LinkedIn between motivational quotes. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. The city's compliance system ran automated quarterly checks. I'd just missed the last one by a week. The next sweep would happen in less than a month. cross-checking every company filing against the current registry of certified officers. When the algorithm found no one listed for Wells Core Industries, it would quietly flag the company as non-compliant, freeze their active permits, and suspend their operating license pending investigation. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I just needed to wait. Across the street, in the tiny space I'd leased, the freshly installed sign read, Civic Edge Consulting. A simple name. Neutral. But it meant something to me. I'd already filed the LLC, opened the business account, and set up a coffee machine that didn't taste like despair. From my window, I had a perfect view of their glass lobby. Every morning, I watched them rush in with their lattes and ring lights, completely unaware that every step they took was on a floor already cracking. The system wasn't broken. It was just waiting for the right moment to speak. Bryce made his grand entrance like he was walking onto a startup stage no one had invited him to. Collared shirt half unbuttoned, gold chain catching the overhead light, Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a cheap Christmas ornament. He was everything wrong with inherited leadership in one smug package. First words out of his mouth weren't hello or thank you. He clapped once, loud, the way people do when they want to sound commanding, but mostly just startle interns. "All right, team, time to disrupt the bureaucracy," he said, grinning. I could almost hear the collective soul of the compliance department trying to escape through the vents. He stood in front of the filing cabinets, 12 years of zoning ledgers, environmental logs, and stamped permits, and frowned like he'd just found a fossil. "We're digitizing this whole thing," he announced. "No more paper. Dashboards. Smart logic. Automation. AI workflows. Translation?" He had no idea what he was talking about. Within a week, half the paper trail was boxed up and shoved into a janitor closet because storage is legacy. One of the newer analysts, a sharp kid named Elise, had asked where the original zoning blueprints would be archived. Bryce blinked. The what? That became his department nickname, the what? By day 3, the team had stopped trying to correct him. They'd dubbed him Captain Compliance out of survival humor. The man used phrases like synergize the permit stack and optimize the regulatory funnel, which don't exist anywhere outside his imagination. But none of it mattered, because he was family, and Madison wanted fresh energy. Meanwhile, he was bragging in every meeting about a massive port expansion deal. "Once this goes through," he said, slapping the table, "we're untouchable." He didn't realize the system itself was already rejecting him. The funny part was that I didn't have to hack a thing. The city's licensing portal still had me subscribed to Wells Corps' public compliance alerts. They'd never removed my name from the notifications. So, when Bryce filed his first official zoning expansion form under authorized officer, my inbox lit up. I clicked open the public entry, took one look at the signature line, and nearly laughed into my coffee. Bryce T. Wells, Authorized Compliance Officer, a title he legally didn't have. Because when I withdrew, the law required that a replacement officer be filed within 30 business days. They hadn't even bothered. The city's back-end system cross-checked the submission, found a designation gap, and quietly rerouted the application to manual review. That's where it landed on the desk of a clerk named Daniel Morris, a man who cared deeply about 3 things: procedure, order, and fresh mechanical pencils. I'd met him once at a state zoning conference where we bonded over terrible coffee and mutual disdain for executive innovation. Daniel was the kind of guy who noticed commas in regulations. When the file hit his queue, he added a single note: no active compliance designation on record per Section 7.3 of Title IX. One line, one click. That was all it took to start the timer. Across the street, Bryce was celebrating his imaginary win, posing for selfies in front of the building with captions like "Big Moves, Bigger Impact," #NextGenCompliance. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Meanwhile, employees were starting to whisper. Elise texted me from her personal phone. "He just told the fire marshal permits are suggestions. Another message came from my old deputy. He's trying to digitize signatures by screenshotting them. I sipped my latte at the cafe window and wrote one word in my notebook. Boom. Because now it wasn't if the city would act. It was when. The Port Authority had already been jittery about Wells Corps' emissions data. Their renewal required a verified third-party compliance officer's signature, and mine was the last valid one on record. Every new document Bryce submitted was technically fraudulent. It would bounce back through 3 agencies before anyone at that glass building realized they'd stepped into traffic. I didn't need revenge emails, threats, or leaks. I had paperwork, filed cleanly, timed perfectly, stamped by law. The system would take care of the rest. The next week passed like the steady click of a clock before detonation. Each day, another whisper, another oversight, another inch closer. Bryce still strutted around like a visionary, completely unaware that the foundation beneath him was crumbling by code. He thought I'd left empty-handed. He had no idea I'd left holding the fuse. It was a Wednesday morning when the call came, just as I was pouring the last of my oat milk into a mug at the cafe across from Wells Corps HQ. The place was quiet, except for the hiss of the espresso machine and a playlist of acoustic covers no one asked for. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, area code from the State Port Authority. I smiled before I even answered. Claire speaking. A pause. The kind of silence that means someone's just realized they're standing on quicksand. Hi, this is Denise McCall from the Port Authority's Environmental Compliance Division, she said, her voice clipped but uneasy. We're reviewing Wells Corps' emissions documentation, and your name appears as the signing compliance officer for the last 3 cycles. We have some questions about recent submissions. I let the pause stretch long enough to let her discomfort bloom. I'm no longer with Wells Corps, I said evenly. Another pause, sharper this time. I could almost hear her flipping through a binder. I wasn't notified of that change, she said. Not surprising, I replied, but it's official. I filed my withdrawal through the state portal on April 18th. Would you like me to forward the notarized document? Denise exhaled through the line. Yes, immediately. I already had the email drafted before she finished. Attached the stamped PDF, added the reference number and timestamp, hit send. The moment that email left my outbox, I knew exactly what would happen. Denise wasn't the kind of bureaucrat who let things slide. She was meticulous. 3-color highlighters, Post-its by regulation, probably a mug that said, trust, but verify. And now she had a gap on record. An entire company operating under expired authorization. Every signature, every permit renewal, every expansion document submitted since April was invalid. Across the street, Wells Corps was hosting what looked like a lifestyle seminar. Madison had turned the lobby into a vision board, pastel balloons, fairy lights, and branded tote bags printed with Future First. She'd hired an event photographer. Bryce was giving an interview to a local business blog about reimagining logistics through digital agility. The irony could have powered the grid. None of them knew that while they were posing for photos, the Port Authority was initiating a full-scale review. Denise replied to my email later that afternoon with just one line. Thank you. Our legal team will be following up. I read it twice, smiled, and closed my laptop. Outside, rain started tapping against the cafe window like a countdown. The fuse was lit. By Thursday, the whispers had turned into confusion. Elise texted again. Something's wrong. Our port contact stopped replying, another message from IT. Bryce just asked how to unflag a compliance record. They were circling the problem but couldn't name it. The system was already pulling their permits into suspension review. Friday came with a storm front and poetic timing. At 4:57 p.m., Bryce gathered the staff into the glass conference room for his big moment. He wanted to end the week on a win. The screens glowed with a giant dashboard. Animated graphs, buzzwords everywhere. He clapped his hands, hit submit, and shouted, "Certified! We're back in business, people!" The room half-heartedly clapped. On the monitor, the confirmation looked legit. Annual operating certification. Submitted. What didn't appear on screen was the missing compliance verification form. The one only a designated officer could attach. Bryce didn't even know it existed. At 5:01 p.m., exactly 1 minute after his grand finale, the state's automated system ran its cross-check. No active compliance officer. No valid authority on file. It flagged the submission as a critical error and triggered a stop work order. There was no alarm, no siren, just an automatic dispatch request and a digitally signed suspension notice posted to Wells Corps' business license. Meanwhile, Madison was sipping a grapefruit spritzer under the fairy lights, laughing for a photo next to a glowing sign that read, "From Legacy to Luminary." They were trending on LinkedIn before they even realized they'd been shut down. I watched from my usual window seat, steam curling from my cup. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across their lobby floor. The same spot where, come morning, a bright orange stop work order would hang like a scarlet letter. I knew the inspector who'd post it too. Martin Stickler. Old school, punctual, allergic to nonsense. He always wore aviators, carried a clipboard, and spoke like he was reading your Miranda rights. I didn't need to show up to know exactly how it would play out. Bryce would arrive late, Madison would arrive louder, and Martin would simply tape history to the glass. And for the first time in 12 years, I'd get to enjoy my coffee, hot, quiet, and utterly satisfied. Monday morning cracked open like a can of static, loud, awkward, and just a little tragic. 7:58 a.m. I sat parked across the street, coffee steaming in my cup holder, windshield fogged from the autumn chill. From my spot, I had a perfect view of the Wells Corps building, all glass and hubris, still plastered with last week's rebrand banners. Next era, next energy, next nest. I almost laughed. 8:03 a.m., right on cue, Bryce's Tesla slid into the lot, crookedly occupying 2 spots as if the laws of geometry also didn't apply to him. He stepped out wearing a zip-up hoodie that read, "Haha, next-gen leadership," sunglasses on, protein shake in hand, adjusted his gold watch like it might make him punctual. Spoiler, it didn't. Behind him came the rest of the crew. Interns balancing trays of muffins, marketing staff dragging helium tanks and boxes of branded tote bags, one of the warehouse supervisors hauling a banner that read, "Compliance, but make it cool." It was chaos dressed in confidence. At 8:09 sharp, the beige Crown Vic rolled up, unmarked, dented, wearing the plate number of bureaucracy itself. Martin Stickler stepped out. Same aviators, same clipboard, same slow, steady stride of a man who'd spent 30 years watching arrogance meet regulation. He didn't speak. He just peeled the tape from a large orange notice and pressed it dead center on the glass doors of Wells Corps HQ. The words screamed against the morning light. Stop work order. Operations suspended. License void. Pending compliance review. Bryce was mid-speech, something about embracing transparency, when he noticed it. His mouth froze mid-syllable. The interns looked at each other, unsure if it was a prank. Madison came storming out moments later, heels clapping the tile like gunshots, wrapped in a new Wells Corps branded tracksuit. "What the hell is this?" she snapped. Martin didn't blink. He turned the page on his clipboard and began reading in a tone so dry it could start fires. Effective immediately, all operations of Wells Corps Industries are suspended due to failure to maintain a valid registered compliance designee. No active designation has been filed since April 18th. He looked up. That's a pretty big problem. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Someone started filming. One of the interns dropped a tray of cupcakes that scattered like tiny symbols of poetic justice. Bryce blinked hard, trying to form words. Madison's voice rose an octave. "There has to be some mistake. My cousin is the compliance officer." Martin tilted his head slightly. "No, ma'am. Your cousin is not registered." Without an official designation, every active license is null, including your expansion permit and shipping contracts. The sound that followed wasn't just silence, it was realization. Inside, employees froze in place as contractors quietly packed up their gear. The sparkle from the fairy lights flickered off the orange notice, turning celebration into autopsy lighting. Bryce stepped closer, stammering, "Can't we just, call someone? Fix it?" Martin closed his clipboard. "You can start with the Department of Licensing, but until then, this building stays sealed." Across the street, I took another slow sip. The foam on my latte left a small mustache on the lid, and I smiled behind it. The empire that had called me replaceable was now publicly humiliated, captured on half a dozen phones, destined for every LinkedIn gossip thread by noon. Inside, chaos bloomed like mold. The founder arrived 10 minutes later, red-faced, tie loose, shouting before he even crossed the lobby. "What in God's name is happening?" he barked. His voice echoed through the glass. Bryce tried to explain, words tumbling out like bad code. Madison hovered nearby, pale as printer paper. The founder ripped the notice off the glass, scanned it, then stormed upstairs toward the boardroom. The staff followed like nervous witnesses to an execution. I didn't need to see the rest, but I stayed anyway. Call it closure. From my car, I could see the blinds trembling on the top-floor conference room. I imagined the scene perfectly. The founder pacing, legal counsel sweating through his collar, Bryce shrinking in his seat, Madison trying to spin disaster into rebranding opportunity. And sitting on the polished table, the same crimson folder I'd placed in the founder's inbox months ago. My withdrawal letter, notarized, time-stamped, and now radioactive. Across the street, I finished my coffee and whispered to no one in particular, "Perfect." The dominoes were falling exactly on schedule. Inside the boardroom, the temperature must have dropped 10 degrees from panic alone. Through the glass facade, I could see fragments of movement. The founder pacing, sleeves rolled, voice raised, the kind of shouting that made even soundproof walls feel thin. His face was red enough to qualify as a hazard symbol. "Who authorized this?" he barked, slamming a palm on the table hard enough to rattle the bottled water lineup. "Who the hell let us operate without a compliance officer?" His voice cracked like static. No one answered. The general counsel, a man who once bragged about skimming for efficiency, sat pale as printer paper, clutching a folder like it was a flotation device in a flood. "There was an email," he stammered finally, flipping the folder open with trembling fingers. "From Claire, dated April 18th. It's her resignation." He slid the page across the table like it was radioactive. The founder squinted down at it, reading aloud under his breath. "Effective immediately. I resign as designated compliance custodian." His jaw tightened. "You mean to tell me this was filed months ago and nobody followed up?" Silence. Only the faint hum of the AC and the sound of a career collapsing in real time. Then the phone on the table buzzed, loud and shrill. The assistant answered, hesitated, then handed the receiver over like it was made of glass. The founder snatched it. "What now?" The voice on the other end was calm, precise, and cold enough to stop a clock. "This is Rachel Sandoval with the State Port Authority's Environmental Oversight Office," she said. "We're calling to inform you that Wells Corps' contract renewal has been suspended pending an external compliance review. Your operating status has been flagged. Effective immediately. All permits and shipping approvals are on hold." The founder blinked, stunned. There's been some misunderstanding," he said, his voice dropping into the oily politeness executives use when they smell ruin. "We have a compliance officer." "No," Rachel said, cutting him off. "You had a compliance officer. You no longer do. And by our records, no replacement was ever filed." The line clicked dead before he could respond. The silence afterward must have been suffocating. One of the analysts, probably the only sane person left in the room, muttered under her breath. "Isn't Claire across the street now?" Heads turned toward the window. Someone pulled the blinds slightly, and for a moment, the entire boardroom stared down at my new office. Civic Edge Consulting, black lettering against frosted glass, sleek and minimal. And there I was, sitting at my desk, posture relaxed, headset on, notebook open. They couldn't hear me, but I knew exactly what they were seeing. The woman they'd shoved out, now calmly answering a call, pin poised, professional smile in place. I lifted my coffee, nodded once, and said into the phone, "This is Claire. Yes, I'm available for an emergency consult. What's the company name?" The blinds snapped shut like a guillotine. Back upstairs, the founder stood frozen. Madison's branded rebrand folder slid slowly off the table and hit the floor with a soft thud. Bryce looked like he'd swallowed a light bulb. Someone muttered, "She's consulting now?" Another voice, "She's the only one certified to fix this." The realization hit them like a landslide. They hadn't just fired a compliance officer. They'd fired the compliance officer. The one who knew every permit, every renewal date, every clause that kept their empire legal. By the time the first damage control meeting ended, the stockroom was dark, the rebranding lights shut off, the fairy lights unplugged. The building looked smaller now, humbler, or maybe just hollow. Across the street, my office lights glowed steady. My inbox was already filling with inquiries, 2 from old suppliers, 1 from a logistics firm that had just lost their environmental clearance, and 1 marked urgent from an anonymous corporate domain. I didn't need to open it to know who it was. They'd come crawling, of course. They always do, because compliance isn't a department. It's oxygen, and they'd just exhaled theirs. I leaned back, crossed my legs, and let the quiet settle around me like silk. Outside, the orange stop work notice still flapped gently against their front door. A perfect reminder that revenge doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just waits for the paperwork to clear, and when it does, it's irreversible. The message hit my inbox at 8:42 that night. Subject line, urgent consultation request. Sender, Bryce Wells, Wells Core Industries. The irony nearly made me spill my tea. I let it sit unread for an hour, savoring the idea of him pacing that glass office, refreshing his sent folder, waiting for a reply that wouldn't come cheap. When I finally opened it, the tone was as desperate as expected. "Hi, Claire. We're in a bit of a regulatory jam. The city has flagged our operations and the Port Authority suspended all contracts. We need immediate assistance. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Signed, Bryce." No apology, no humility. Just entitlement dressed as urgency. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I drafted an invoice. My new rate wasn't just high. It was surgical. $900 an hour for emergency compliance remediation, 3-hour minimum, payable upfront. I attached it to a brief email that read, "Happy to assist. Attached are my current consulting terms. Once payment is received, we can discuss next steps. Send." It took 12 minutes. The payment hit my account before I finished cleaning my mug. I smiled. At least he was fast at something. The next morning, I arrived at their office for the first time since the implosion. The air outside felt different, quieter, heavier. The orange notice still hung on the glass, edges curling slightly from the sun. Through the doors, I could see Bryce and Madison waiting, side by side, trying to look composed. Bryce extended a hand, which I ignored, walking straight past them toward the conference room. "Let's get to it," I said. They followed, tripping over excuses. "It's been a misunderstanding," Madison started, her voice too bright. "The system..." It's not the system, I interrupted. It's you. I dropped my laptop bag onto the table, opened it, and began pulling out files, copies of everything they'd ignored. This, I said, tapping the resignation letter, was filed, notarized, and time-stamped. This, I gestured to the audit gaps, was flagged 3 times. This, holding up a printed email, was the warning you forwarded to your assistant instead of answering. Bryce swallowed hard. Madison looked smaller by the second. Can we reverse it? She asked finally, her voice cracking. I smiled politely, professional but cold. You can reapply for reinstatement once the state audit concludes, but that process can take 6 to 8 months, assuming they find no further violations. Bryce blinked. 6 to 8 months, I finished. And that's if they believe your new compliance officer understands what compliance means. Which, judging by your last quarter's filings, is questionable. The founder entered midway through the meeting, eyes bloodshot, tie gone. He looked at me like a man seeing a ghost. Claire, he said quietly, voice rough. Can you fix this? I paused, letting the question hang. I can stabilize it, I said. But fix? No. You built this mess yourselves. The room fell silent again. I stood, collected my folder, and headed for the door. Madison tried to speak. You're leaving? I turned, met her eyes. No, I said softly. You did that months ago. Outside, the autumn wind tugged at the notice still taped to their door. I glanced at it once more before walking away, a masterpiece of bureaucracy doing what it does best, enforcing cause and effect. Across the street, the sign for Civic Edge Consulting gleamed in the morning light. Inside, my assistant was already setting up the next client call. I smiled, the kind that comes only from quiet victories. By noon, my calendar was booked solid for 3 weeks. Word had spread fast through the city's regulatory grapevine. Companies that had once dismissed my warnings were now lining up to pay for them. When I finally sat back at my desk, phone buzzing with new inquiries, I allowed myself one small indulgence. I pulled up the news. A headline blinked at the top of the business feed. Wells Core operations frozen amid compliance collapse. Founder promises internal review. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Everyone in the industry would know who'd lit the fuse. I closed the tab, sipped my coffee, and whispered the same word that started it all. Perfect. Because in corporate warfare, silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And revenge? Sometimes it's nothing more than a signature, stamped in triplicate, waiting for its moment to detonate.